Okay, thank you. All of us at one point in time have all heard the chorus, if there's something strange in the neighborhood, who you gonna call? Ghostbusters! There should also be another theme song for some of the most strongest people we know. This theme should say, when mom and dad say no, who you gonna call? Grandma, grandpa. When we think of our grandparents, most of us have very good memories that we will always cherish. They're the ones that would give us the yes when our parents would say no when we would ask for something. For some of us, our grandparents were more than just grandparents. For some of us, they were the ones that became our parents. One thing that we never think about is the abuse that a lot of our elders endure by the hands or mouths of the very same people we entrust them to. We have all heard of child abuse, domestic partner abuse, or otherwise known as intimate partner violence. The one type of violence that we very seldom ever hear about is elderly abuse. When we think or hear about elder abuse, the first thing that comes to mind is physical abuse. This is just one of 5 types of abuse that elderly people endure, and is getting to be a more common thing that seems to be getting worse. Along with physical abuse, there is also financial and sexual abuse, neglect, and all of these cause psychological abuse. This is something that I would hear a lot when I was working as a personal care assistant, also known as a PCA. I would sit and talk to our residents, and I would listen to how they would describe their lives before they had to come to the facility. Excuse me, I lost my spot. And some of the things they would tell me would be so heartbreaking. I would listen to how some of them lived through segregation. They would be told by their parents how to act when they came across certain people of certain colors. The advice that the mother would give them of how to behave out in public so they wouldn't be humiliated, hit, or mistreated, or even worse, killed. Some of the residents lived through the Great Depression and made it out safely and made something out of their lives. Some of them became housewives, some of them became career women, and some they just became survivors. The whole time I would be listening to them, the only thing I could think of is, how could anyone hurt such a sweet soul? Let's begin by discussing how a lot of these cases of elder abuse is never even brought to the attention to anyone, and the possible causes of this. A lot of reports of elder abuse are never reported due to the fact that the elderly person being abused is afraid to say anything. One reason for this is there could be an emotional bond that the elderly person has formed with her caregiver. If there is an emotional bond formed, then the elderly person may feel as if he or she says something, then their abuser will get in trouble. And if that bond is there, then they, the victim, will not want to see their abuser face any consequence. They may see their caregiver as if they were one of their own grandchildren. Another reason some cases are never reported could be due to fear. They may feel as if they say something to someone about them being abused, then there could possibly be repercussions. They may feel as if they are the cause of the abuse they are suffering. Another form of abuse that elderly people face and may not even realize it until it is too late is financial abuse. This sort of abuse occurs when the caregiver is knowingly stealing or misusing their victim's money for their own financial gain. This can occur when the elderly person is either still at home and using at-home care, or they're admitted into some sort of facility. Sexual abuse is not always the typical sexual abuse that we hear about on a day-to-day basis. Sexual abuse is not only sexually assaulting the elderly person, which does happen unfortunately, but it can also be when the caregiver is helping the elderly person get changed, take a shower, take a bath, getting dressed, and they leave them exposed. This type of abuse is not acceptable at all. But when this type of abuse occurs, then this can make the elderly person feel shame, disrespected, guilty, helpless, or even make them feel like they deserve that sort of treatment. Nobody deserves that kind of treatment under no circumstances. Neglect is another form of abuse, and this is when the elderly person is not taken care of at all. They usually are denied medication, showers, being changed when they have incontinence problems, or just left unclean and uncared for. They may not be getting the nutrition they need, and they may not be getting the medical treatment that they need to keep them healthy. Physical, financial, sexual abuse, and neglect all can cause serious psychological abuse to the elderly person as well. These types of abuse can make the elder believe that they deserve what is happening to them and that nobody cares for them. This type of abuse can cause the worst damage to an elderly person because they can fall into depression, and some may even give up on life itself. Nobody should ever give up on life. We are all put here to be loved, to be cared for, and to be respected. But unfortunately, our elderly people do not get this treatment. Now that we have discussed the different types of abuse that the elderly face, we should look for ways to intervene, prevent, and educate people on the subject so it is not an ongoing issue. People can organize campaigns and bring awareness on the different types of abuse that the elderly are facing in the country. The more people learn how to notice the subtle and obvious ways to spot elderly abuse is better. If people pay closer attention to how the elderly person's personality changes, then maybe they will start to open their eyes a little bit more. If one day a person is happy-go-lucky, and then over time that personality starts to diminish, then there could be more to that sudden change. One other way that abuse can be prevented is by getting facilities and at-home care businesses better staffed with people. There are too many facilities with agencies that are way understaffed, and this can cause the caregivers to become overwhelmed and overworked. Overwhelmed and overworked people can also become burned out very quickly. This can cause the caregiver to feel like they have to rush to help the resident that they are helping, and this is where accidents occur and at times abuse. If a caregiver is rushing to help a resident, they can fall, get skin tears, or the caregiver can start to force the elderly person to hurry up so they can get to the other residents they need to attend to. If a caregiver gets overwhelmed, they can get easily burned out, and they may reach the point to where they just stop caring and walk out and leave the elderly person alone. When we take a look at the elders that are getting abused, the ones that seem to get abused the most are the ones that are suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. They get taken advantage of the most because caregivers assume that they will simply forget what is being done to them. Some caregivers are not educated enough on how to care for an elderly person that is suffering with memory loss. It takes a lot of patience, caring, and understanding to be able to care for someone with this terrible disease. For caregivers that are not well educated on this, can be the ones that get burnt out the quickest, or they may get overwhelmed more. When I worked at the PCA, there was an elderly woman that was in the second phase of her Alzheimer's. She used to be a music teacher abroad for some years, and when she came back to the States, she continued to teach music to third graders. She was a very sweet lady. If the caregiver did not know how to calm her down when she got upset and agitated, it was not a pretty picture. We quickly learned that when she gets agitated, if we hold her hands, start singing, and start dancing with her, she would cooperate. That is when we would ask her, Della, can you come to the restroom with us so we could change you, take a shower, change you? And she would always quickly say, well, yeah, let's go. What are you waiting for? And she would cooperate. One day when we came into work in the morning, she had bruises on her face. That was very heartbreaking to see, and very hard to see. We asked what happened to her, and our coordinator advised us that one of the second shift caregivers had pushed her out of the way and made Della hit the medicine cart. The medicine cart is made up of not only hard plastic, but also metal. This happened to Della several times, and when it was brought to management attention, very little was ever done about it. That caregiver kept her job. When the problem is brought to the attention of the family, Della's daughter got a bike helmet, put little flowers all on it, decorated it real nice and pretty for her mom, and she would use it on a daily basis. She could not be up walking around without it because she would fall and she would hit her head. Multiple head injuries. We all know what can happen, especially in an elderly person. This did not prevent Della from ending up in the hospital with a fractured hip and bruises that almost covered her whole face. Needless to say, the reason it was given as to why Della was put through all of that was because there was only 2 people to care for 40 residents with memory loss. Sadly to say, this happens more than anyone has been talking about. It is a subject that people don't realize or just refuse to believe that it's happening. And unfortunately, this happens on a day-to-day basis. Elderly abuse comes in many shapes and forms, and the elderly person is not the only one that suffers mentally and emotionally. When a family member finds out that their loved one is being hurt, they can feel as if they have let their loved one down by entrusting them with a caregiver. Abuse is something that should not ever be normalized, yet it seems as though this is a growing issue in the country and around the world. The ones that see the most abuse is the elderly that suffers from memory loss. Caregivers might have the notion that nobody will believe their victim and just say that is their disease. Or they may believe that the victim will not remember what is being done to them. They remember. This is an issue that should be talked about more and people should be educated more on. Abuse is not just happening to women that are in bad relationships or to children that have parents that harm them. Abuse is also occurring within a community of people that worked hard all of their life, raised their families, went through hardships during their lifetime, and should not have to live their final chapter of life being abused by anyone.